All right, all right. Looks like we've got everyone in and we're going to get started. So first of all, Cody McLain, how are you today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Cody, tell me a little bit about your story. How did you get started? How did you begin your journey?
So I actually wrote a book on it because I've been through quite a bit called From Foster Care to Millionaire. Kind of the short summary of it is that my parents died before I turned 18 and I was partly in foster care. But prior to that, I had no friends and I didn't fit in. And so the thing that I found the most interesting wasn't in school, it wasn't sports, it was actually building my first business, which was a hosting company. And actually, it was a good idea to build that business because after my mother died, I had no means of financial support for myself, but I had a somewhat stable income stream just from the business that I had built. So I've been through, mostly grew up in Cincinnati, and I ended up creating a handful of companies, some of which failed, but through the years, I've been able to create more and more and greater success companies. My most recent one, I sold it for around 35 million and it had 1,000 employees based in the Philippines. And we provided outsourced support services to uh, tech companies, more or less. So it was a long journey to get to this point, and I've had to overcome a huge range of obstacles, of self-defeating thoughts, especially as somebody where I was a high school dropout. And I mean, I was probably ended up like I could have ended up in a number of situations. And it's just been also a journey of self-discovery of figuring out who I am and pushing myself outside my comfort zone, becoming a pilot, learning how to scuba dive into wrecks, and just constantly pushing myself to learn new skills. And time again, I've taught myself that I am more capable and more I can achieve way more things than I ever thought I once could. And so I feel like I'm kind of on a mission, Adrian, to try and inspire others that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, you're fully capable of achieving anything you want in life.
That's awesome. And there's so much there, and I can't wait to dive in. To let everybody know, in this interview, we're speaking with Cody McLain to help young professionals with ADHD become independent. What would you say you are most proud of in your career so far, Cody?
I think having 1,000 person company is a pretty cool thing. But it wasn't necessarily just that. It's the whole it's the mindset of having the growth mindset and being able to apply that to so many different areas and obstacles to be able to prove to myself that I can do these things that I once thought I couldn't do. And every time I've written an article or I've done an interview in which I've received somebody told me how it helped them in some way, that's kind of what helps make me get up in the morning, of just knowing that I'm having a positive influence on others in the world. And that's certainly my goal. So I think just the smallest amount of positive intent that I've been able to provide thus far, I think is what I'm most proud of.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we definitely share that. Um, what did you do to accomplish it? What did it take to get that to 1,000 people?
Mm. Constantly pushing past the voice that told me that I was overwhelmed and I didn't know what I was doing, and not looking too far off into the distance, because so often it's that voice in our head that says that we can't do this, that feeling of overwhelm, of a feeling like it's such a tall mountain, how are we ever going to climb it? And just focusing on one step in front of you. Because if I had known all of the stuff that I was going to go through in order to have that 1,000 person company, I can certainly tell you I would not have even started. And so in some ways, ignorance can be helpful to a certain extent, because you need to be somewhat of a risk taker in order to create a new business or a business model, and trying something that most people are way too afraid to do. but it was just looking one foot in front of the other, seeing what problems exist now, having the awareness to recognize what are the biggest problems and obstacles and things that I need to focus my attention towards. And then even having fundamental concepts of like, there's another entrepreneur who kind of one of his so-called like meditations is he'll ask you on a daily basis where you should ask yourself, what is the one thing I can do today that's going to directly have an impact on my ability to make revenue or profit, et cetera. And that can help keep you afloat. So having certain rules that you pick up, I think is also helpful. But
was there an important turning point or aha moment in your business or life?
I think everybody has that to some extent. I've probably had more than a few. The thing that I do feel kind of this, I just go back to mentally, is just becoming a private pilot and like getting that license. Because when I was younger, I would play Microsoft Flight Simulator and I would always fly the 737. But in the back of my head, I thought, I could never actually be a pilot. Like I was too stupid. And then to actually overcome that hurdle that was so deeply ingrained in me as a child that I was inept and incapable, that is just stood out as like this momentous achievement where I had this thought of like, oh, wow, everybody kind of starts off with this low, or most people start with this low sense of self-esteem unless they're delusional towards themselves. And then having that low self-esteem, that belief that you're not good enough, that fixed mindset prevents you from even trying to do the things that could allow you to feel that sense of fulfillment and meaning that you so desperately seek in life. And so being able to push past that. And when I had that thought, I'm like, wow, this is something everybody, or mostly everybody, experiences in life. And what can I do to help decrease that, or help inspire, or help others push past that same imposter syndrome, that feeling of they're not good enough, and give them the confidence that they need to try and at least make an attempt, at least try and live life in according with their values. Because it's not there's the whole thing about what is the biggest regret of those on their deathbed is it's not all the mistakes that they made, it's all the things that they chose not to do. And so what are you choosing not to do right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. So much to go off on that. I just want to introduce Cody to everybody. Cody McLain's unique foresight has led to his immense success as an entrepreneur. He saw opportunity in a specific area, existing tech startups, and had the 86th fastest growing company according to the 2019 Inc. 5000 list, and was ranked the fastest growing outsourcing company in the US. The company employed over 1,000 employees with offices in Austin and the Philippines. And Cody has since sold the majority of his stake and currently is the host of the mindhack.com podcast, is the author of the book From Foster Care to Millionaire, and is working on building a startup studio. He lives in Austin, Texas. So Cody, in your own words, can you tell us a little bit more in detail about what you're currently working on?
Sure. So I've partnered up with a brilliant product designer, and he has a desire and he finds extreme fulfillment out of creating products for others. And so he's been building products and designing more or less napkin sketches into a CAD software and managing the China manufacturing workflow for others. Yet I find fulfillment and figuring out how to make people work together, how to make processes, how to build systems that can create a scalable, functional company. And so it just so happened that our interests and the time, it was just so really right for the both of us. And so we've partnered to create what's called more or less a startup studio, because I found after selling a handful of companies already that it's really depressing and it's really hard to go from selling your company and then starting all over again, where you're having to find and hire new people and you're basically starting off from scratch. And it's difficult every time, because every time your self-esteem, your confidence is challenged, is that you're having to start all over again. And what if you fail? What if you're never successful again? Everybody goes through these types of thoughts, and it's amplified when you're at a level where your entire sense of purpose and how you value yourself is based off of your ability to be successful. And so to look at it from another angle, like the guys who created 37 Signal as your base camp, is they chose purposely not to take outside investment and to keep their operations small, because they wanted to create a company that they're going to have for the rest of their lives, because that felt much more meaningful to them. And so in our sense is my business partner loves to create things and he finds fulfillment in that. And I love to scale and build things, and I find fulfillment within that. And by us seeing this potential partnership, we're partnering together to create a startup studio, which is a company that makes companies, and finding and creating the processes in place to build them, because he's got the branding, the design, the strategy, and I've got the scaling component. So it works really well. And I think that's the thing I'm most excited about. Not only is it something where we can make money, but it's something where we can build something that we'll have for the rest of our lives and constantly be creating and selling different companies. But we have a mutual partnership that is just so strongly tied together. It's just, I'm very excited about it.
Yeah. And back to what you were saying, in the beginning about the way that you think about creating those systems and using them to scale. Can you tell us a little bit about how your work and life can benefit the different caregivers of kids with ADHD or young professionals with ADHD?
Well, I think the biggest issue comes down to self-confidence and having a certain level of self-awareness and critical thinking skills. So the part that I left out is the Mind Hack podcast, which is really something I created out of the result of having so many interesting conversations with others and wishing that it had been recorded, because if it had been, I know it would be able to benefit somebody else. And so that, along with my own website where I've blogged about my own experiences and knowledge and insight that I've gained over the years, is just this desire to share and to create meaningful experiences and share information in a way that's going to be that others can read and comprehend and potentially apply to their own lives. So I'm still trying to find exactly how I am best suited to do that. But overall, it's trying to get or share my own experiences. And I suppose it's not too often you find somebody who lost their parents, came from nothing, had no money, dropped out of high school, also has Asperger's and ADHD, and then somehow still managed to create a huge multi-million-dollar company. I still don't know exactly how I did it. There's still quite a bit of imposter syndrome in me, but I also have the recognition that I don't think I'd want to do it again, because I wasn't nearly as happy as I thought I was going to be. But the point is, I tried, and I've put my whole heart and effort into doing the things that I really committed to. And at the core of it, and the core of the writing and the interviews, is this desire to help others and to help myself as well. And the process of helping myself, of interviewing, say, like my most recent interview, Dr. Nate Zinzer, who is the performance psychology director at West Point, that was a fascinating interview. But I interview him in a way that is about my own experiences. Like, okay, how can I get this world famous psychologist to help me in this interview right now? And just as a function of doing that, I'm able to help others. So it seems like a win-win.
Absolutely. And on that, why is it so important, one, for you to help these kids or young professionals? And why is it so important for them to create systems?
So I may have you repeat the first or the second part, but so funny thing, I just got a Tesla, but it was sitting in my garage for 3 days before I drove it for the second time. The first time was just taking it from the parking lot. And it seems so antithetical to me, just in my own awareness of, like, 5-10 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, I've got a Tesla. Like, I'm going to drive it. And you just obsess over it. And I probably couldn't sleep because I'd be thinking about it and I'd be spending hours in there. And just to me, I guess I'm at this point now where I've had a certain level of financial success that, firstly, I never once thought I could ever have. And then the realization that once you get there, that all these things that you once desired so much, that propelled you, that motivated you to seek the success that you set yourself on, is you go over it and you're kind of like, it feels empty. And so it's like, I still wanted the Tesla, but I didn't like envelop my personality, my desire around this material object. And I think in doing so, it also helps you to realize, well, you're at the top of the mountain now, the mountain that everybody wants to get to. How do you find meaning out of that? Because most people just spend their entire life just trying to make money and they never get there. And so to get to a point where you can make money and be and have that sense of satisfaction, then you realize that, well, money's not the entire thing. I mean, we all kind of know that, it's pretty cliche, but you should really focus on finding your purpose. And as a function of finding your purpose, you will likely be in a position to make money and be happy. And I think that's like the sweet spot. And so therefore I spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what's the most meaningful thing I can do? And then I thought, okay, about some of the most successful people on the planet. So like Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Bill Gates is helping people in the present with his foundation and new initiatives trying to help millions of people. And Elon Musk, I think, is purely focused on the future. How can we help humanity in the future? So therefore, the most meaningful and purposeful thing you can do is either help people in the present or the future. Is kind of like the conclusion that I came to. And most people who are in such a position, they'll end up finding the thing that feels the most meaningful to them. And so for me, that's those who have gone through the foster care system, or those who struggle or have some kind of mental illness or diagnosis. And so that's kind of where I'm at in phase. It's like success, check. Now I want to be happy. So as a function of my own self-interested nature, I'm going to help others.
That's awesome. And so the second part was, why is creating systems so important for kids with ADHD?
Well, systems and habits are kind of very intertwined, because you can't always rely on how you're going to wake up in the morning. And we all have habits. Most should brush our teeth in the morning, and you brush your teeth at night. And some of these things that you don't think about. But if you grew up, so for the longest time, I only brushed my teeth in the evening. And then I realized, oh, wait, I should be doing it in the morning. And I could never motivate myself. It was like one of those, it seems like a super easy thing, but if you don't feel like doing it, then it's very hard to get started. But there's a concept of 21 days about building a habit, and it's pretty varied. It's not specifically 21 days. It varies for everybody. But if you can do something consistently for a period of time, then eventually it's going to become ingrained into you, where it almost becomes ingrained at like a subconscious level. And now we don't have to go into habits, although I love habits, and there's lots of great books on habits, like Atomic Habits and by James Clear, which is a great book for anybody getting started. But in terms of systems and habits, it makes it kind of the automatic. It makes it the default. And if you're focused on building good systems and habits, that can accommodate the deficits that those with ADHD typically have. And so a great example of that is, say, how are you always losing your keys? Or are you losing your wallet, or you're losing your phone? And so most of the time when you come in, where you should put your keys in one specific place, somewhere on the wall. And if you keep forgetting to do that, then set an external reminder, create a sticky note where you typically, and all the places you leave your keys, and remind yourself that, okay, I need to go put the keys there. Eventually, every time you come in, it doesn't matter whether you're thinking, you're going to put the keys up on the wall, and that way you're never going to lose the keys. Or in some cases, like I've got an AirPod, but I've got a little case on it that has an AirTag. So that way I can always find my AirPods if I ever misplace them. And so that's an example of creating external methods to prevent yourself from losing things. And you can apply that to everything. So there's many concepts, even for information management. There is Tiago Forte, who's just an excellent, highly respectable person that sells online courses. And his most successful course is called The Second Brain. And he details a information architecture type system called PARA, which is actually pretty simple: projects, areas, resources, and archive. And it details that you should put everything that you're currently working on with an end date into a project folder, and all of the ongoing areas in your life into an areas. And he gives you examples on how to do this. And so just by me adapting that system allowed me to organize my own information architecture online. Because what's the point of, say, using Evernote or Google Drive if you don't have a system in place to organize that information? And if you don't put it into something that you can easily recognize and remember, then what's the point of having it to begin with? So there's a huge range of applications for the idea or concept of having habits or systems, but it all comes back to helping to create a better and optimized version of you. Because you don't say productivity is doing the amount of work that you need to do in order to live the rest of your life. And if you're spending an hour trying to find something, or you can't remember something because you don't have the right system in place, then, well, it all seems kind of minute. I don't know. I think there's a certain level of optimization that we should all apply to our own lives, a level of self-awareness. But I'm rambling on, so feel free to interrupt me if I.
No, not at all. No, I relate fully, right? Definitely having to create systems and organization and pathways really that are repeatable and therefore like easy to follow, that keep everything together, right? Because it's so easy to get lost with it, especially as an entrepreneur when there's so many things happening simultaneously all the time. So one thing I'd like to ask you is, talking about being someone with ADHD in a professional setting, as a young professional, just trying to really establish yourself during what could be, some of the most difficult times or periods of life, in like early mid-20s. Can you talk a little bit about emotional regulation and awareness in a professional setting and how you've handled that?
Emotional regulation. I think that's one of the things that a lot of those with ADHD tend to struggle with. And I certainly struggled with it when I was younger. And it was something where I had anger issues. And it's only after having the angry incident out loud that I would later regret whatever I ended up doing. And I think a lot of others can relate, where you have this emotion that bubbles out of you and it comes from nowhere. You don't even necessarily know where it came from, but your ability to view it in hindsight or after the fact, it's always after the fact. It's always in hindsight. It's always, I apologize for that thing that I did. And I think a part of that is a function of the toxic masculinity that we have in our culture, where boys will hold in their emotions because they don't want to be crying in front of everybody. And we're now in a society where we have less and less close friends that we can share our unfiltered thoughts and emotions with others and seek the validation that we need. And so a lot of the things that I really like to talk about is not necessarily the problems that we have in society, of which there are very many, of course, but how can we try and work on ourselves despite all of these hindrances that we have in society, whether it's like social media causing increase in addiction and less in self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. But one of them, I think, is we have to have the ability to self-regulate, to self-soothe ourselves. And it's something that a lot of us lack, where if we feel angry, or if we feel sad or upset, our default is to try and numb ourselves. And you don't know that, say, checking your email or scrolling on Instagram or TikTok is a form of numbing yourself, but it is, you are potentially distracting yourself from another thought or another anxiety that you are not consciously aware of, but you're distracting yourself from it. And so to have a certain level of emotional regulation, it really takes a disciplined practice or a committed intention with yourself. Now, what do I mean by that? It means to either, what I'd like to have is, I'll have my foundational habits, but we'll get into that later. But I like to have a meditation technique. And so it doesn't have to be like 20 minutes a day or using Calm or Headspace, but it's some practice, some daily practice, where even if it's just a single conscious breath with yourself, to be able to have something that can center you or give you a ability to recognize your thoughts. Because everybody with ADHD, I think, has this terrible idea of what meditation is, and this idea of what it has to be. And the benefit, I mean, I'll have conversations, and like the most common thing is, well, I can't meditate because like my mind's just going everywhere. And of course, I mean, that's the point. But you also should recognize that everybody's mind is going everywhere, not just those who have that with ADHD. But the value of meditation isn't this idea that, oh, I'm supposed to be able to meditate and not think for like a few minutes. Is, I mean, the average person, they can't think for 5 seconds without a thought. I mean, much less than that. Like we're having unconscious thoughts, whether we are fully aware of it or not. But the benefit of meditation is to create the practice, just like going to the gym, is you create the practice, the awareness to recognize when you're out on a limb, on a thought, on something that's not a priority, or you're going down this rumination rabbit hole, to be able to recognize that and pull yourself back to a center. And so the meditation is not it doesn't have to be like the 10 minutes that you specifically do, but in my mind, it's the practice of recognizing, of having that level of self-awareness to stop yourself before you do it or say something because you're angry that they said something, and prevent yourself from having those bad negative interactions, because the more you have them, the more it's going to affect you in a negative way. And it's going to potentially create this self-fulfilling prophecy where you're going to feel like nobody cares for you or nobody likes you. And that can just go off and on and on. And so to have a practice, I think number one is important. And from there, apart is, I think there's always a therapy, which is always a great option, but you have to be willing to admit to yourself that you have a problem, which is also a pretty hard thing a lot of the times. But yeah, I think I've created a level of self-awareness that I think I'm pretty conscientious. And I do think that a lot of those with ADHD also can be conscientious, but they need to be willing to spend the time on themselves. And I guess for me, I like to read nonfiction books. I used to hate it, but that's really, I would say, if it all comes back to it, is like the single best or the single best habit that I was able to implement, which is just like 30 minutes a day of just reading. And it doesn't seem like a lot in comparison, but it has allowed me to understand so much about myself and the problems in the world and how to improve myself, because it gives you these frameworks. Say if you're reading a book about ADHD, or productivity or burnout, or mindfulness or health, is it gives you frameworks at which to view the world, at which to shape your lens and to understand yourself. Even like Myers-Briggs for myself, which is not necessarily wholly based off of science, but for me, it helped me understand, oh, I'm an INTJ. It allows me to see myself and understand myself, as long as you don't let that framework create a certain impediment of, say, I'm not great in social situations. You know, I think it's pretty easy to go off on the negatives of a personality type, the negatives of having diagnosed with ADHD or Asperger's, any of that, and you can tend to discount it, which is the wrong approach. It just gives you a ability to view this thing and to be able to view your pros and your cons, perhaps focus on your strengths a little bit more, to be conscious of your cons, and in some ways to allow that to create like a challenge within yourself. So if I go to like a conference and I'm having to talk or socialize with people, I will initially be like, no, I really do not want to do that. And I can ask, well, it's great, I don't really want to do it. Do I want to do it? Maybe I'll do it for like 10, 15 minutes, and I'll just set a timer. And if I don't feel like I want to talk after that, then I'll just leave. And so that's creating a mental rule for myself that alleviates the anxiety that I have that's associated with something that I would otherwise think is not something I'm good at. But that, by creating those like mini challenges, that's what helps you get outside your comfort zone. It helps you grow. And I'll just end on one of my favorite authors, whose name is Ryan Holiday, also here in Austin, who writes a lot about Stoicism. And he had a tattoo on his arm that says and it was the title of a second book is called The Obstacle is the Way. And I think that's a super important concept, that so often the thing that makes us the most uncomfortable is the path. That's where we should be going.
There was so much covered in this answer, and so many of the things that you mentioned are really, really important, and can obviously personally attest to them. To quickly recap, I just kind of want to put a bow on it for everyone to walk away with is, number one, self-awareness, so that you can truly understand like where you're lacking and where you need help. And then there are many different ways that you could branch off to get that help, right? There's these nonfiction books, which I think is also a great recommendation, just because the fact that it's a book means it had to go through a lot of different filters before making it its way out to the world, especially time-tested books. So that's absolutely huge. And then, if you can go down the mindfulness rabbit hole, and that then all contributing to how to better regulate that emotion, and be aware in this professional setting to grow, to continue to upskill, to grow as a human being, and move up in your careers. So you mentioned something that I want to dive into called GTD. What is that, and what makes it effective?
That's the Getting Things Done system by David Allen. And it was really one of the very first few productivity books I read, but it also had just such a profound change in how I was able to manage the constant barrage of thoughts and tasks and things that I need to do and things that I want to do. And it allowed me to have a framework at which to extract that from my head. Like, I didn't realize just how many things that I was holding on to mentally that I needed to do, but the act of not writing it down was using up mental resources that I could otherwise exert towards actual focused work that would allow me to feel happier and more fulfilled. And so having a system that I was able to implement that allows me to use Siri or Alexa at any time to say that, hey, I'm going to have a task that I want to insert, and I can do it whether I'm driving or in the shower, or I've got little shower pad notes that I can do, and then reviewing that system on a daily basis. And then it helped me to create mental rules of, like, say, if I'm going to add something to a list, or I'm going to do my daily or weekly review of reviewing that list and prioritizing the items. If the task is under 2 minutes, then just do it, because it often takes more time to do something if it's just under 2 minutes. And sometimes I won't feel like doing that task, but then I can remind myself, oh, well, it's just 2 minutes. I can do something. I could do that in just 2 minutes. It creates this super low barrier to entry to be able to start something, because so much of the procrastination that we often feel, which I'm like the world's biggest procrastinator, believe it or not, is that we tend to feel like it's, we tend to get overwhelmed. And so I would say, unfortunately, GTD isn't like the holy grail of productivity, so to speak, but it allowed me to create a system to extract my thoughts, my reminders, so that my brain was not holding on to all these things that I had to do. And it's creating a structured way at which I can insert tasks, and I can create a place, a format for me to note things that I want to do in the future, whether it's reminders, et cetera. And so it did make, I would say, I don't know if it alleviated my anxiety, but it helped me to use it in a more optimal way of not wasting as much time and jumping from one thing to the next thing. So I would highly recommend, I think everybody with ADHD should at least understand what GTD is, and then to be able to take the concepts that really speak to them and then to apply it in their own life. Because I don't think we should ever read a concept of somebody else's system and then try and apply it exactly. We can use it as a bouncing board and find out what works for us.
Absolutely, yeah. And on that note, we want to dive into reverse meditation, not to-do lists, and fun to-do lists. I think that's all relevant to how to think about getting things done.
Yeah. So reverse meditation, I've written a blog post on it. It's kind of like my own terminology that I invented. And that was a function of me having a massage chair that I would start to use later at night. And it doesn't have to be an expensive massage chair. You can get just a chair that you might meditate on. And I actually find that even if it's something just with those spinny things, but moral of the story was what I would do is I would get in this massage chair at the end of the night. It'd be like a 20-minute, 15-minute session. And it allowed me, after a certain period of time, I would stop thinking about what it's actually doing to me. But I would notice, like, even if I was tired, I wouldn't necessarily always fall asleep. But it allowed me to just revert into my own head. I would have like an eye mask and some kind of space music, and I would be able to think about the day. I'd be able to ask myself what happened. It's like having like an emotional check-in with yourself. And so often we don't have an evening routine. We end up just going into bed, and then we have a mind that's still racing, and then we can't go to sleep. And then it's associating more things that's not sleep with your bedroom and your bed. So therefore it becomes more difficult to fall asleep, even when you don't have your mind is racing, because you're thinking and you're trying to sleep in the same location, and our mind is an association machine. So to recognize that is important. But I created this chair as this place that I would go to is like the opposite of meditation. Whereas often in the morning when you're doing a meditation, you're trying to center yourself. It's not about pushing thoughts away. It's about, I like the concept that Headspace has of actually looking at clouds, like thoughts as clouds, and then to watch them going to and watching them leave. Whereas in this, I'm actually exploring my own thoughts. I'm exploring my own cognition, and I'm going down and finding out what is the thing that feels the most emotionally sensitive to me right now. And let me think about that. And then understanding like Stoicism, say Ryan Holiday's books, is allowed me to implement a system that I would be able to recognize my own rumination. And I ask myself, is this relevant? And if it wasn't, then I could actually let it go. So it was so profound in helping me to understand what is the most important thing I should be working on, because we can be super busy. We can be a very busy person, but it doesn't make us a happy person or necessarily a productive person. So this allowed me to, it's kind of, there's that old Abraham Lincoln quote of like, tell me to cut down a tree and I'll spend like the first 9 hours like sharpening the saw, in the last hour to actually cut down the tree. And so it's kind of the same way. Not only is it a way for me to let go of the things that my mind is kind of subconsciously holding on to at the end of the day, it makes it super easy to actually fall asleep, because I have given my inner self time to come out. I have allowed myself to feel the emotions that we often aren't really trying to feel. And by doing that, it helped me to just be a lot more self-aware and a lot more self-loving as well, to be able to recognize the achievement. And so I think it's somebody who is very an entrepreneur. If you're an entrepreneur, you tend to not be very, very grateful of your achievements because you're always looking ahead and future oriented. And so one thing I would do is say you graduate college as like a student, and in school to celebrate, maybe you go and party with friends. And I think that's one way of celebrating. But in that way, you're sharing a positive experience. You're not necessarily telling yourself inside, like, you know what, good job. And I think that is also part of the issue that we have, where we don't have that sense of gratitude for where we are in life, because we're always looking at other things. And so even with this reverse meditation, and we're just trying to take time with yourself, just close your eyes and just like maybe listen to some music and just see what comes up, what feeling comes up. And if you just recently have like an achievement, so often I felt like the meditation itself was my way of self-love. Because if you find that right loving thought of feeling like, wow, you achieved it, you made something, like your whole brain will just like light up and like tingles, and you will feel this overwhelming sense of love and compassion for yourself that so often we don't make time for ourselves. And so I'm saying that the second point is that you can have an external form of happiness, but make sure that you have an internal form as well, because you can celebrate with others, but you actually should really make sure that you're celebrating it with yourself first.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with so many of these things. And I kind of want to dive into how this came about. Like, what was it in you that spurred the need to do something about it? Because I think it's very easy to just go with the flow and kind of let life happen. And not realize that there's a problem until it's too late and it's expressed itself in a way that you regret. And so I would like to outline for any young professionals or caregivers listening who are wondering, how they can help the kids that they care for, or how they can help themselves come to that moment of realization where this is now something that's necessary, or that, is beneficial enough to act on.
I think that is kind of like the holy grail of questions, because you're asking, say somebody who wants to lose weight, and they've tried a diet pill. Maybe they've tried going to the gym, and then they lost the motivation because it became hard, or because they didn't see the results, or they just can't see how they can possibly remove this certain like the Diet Coke or the Coke from your daily diet. It just seems impossible. And I think what I would probably say is that there is a it really, most of the habits and the changes that I've been able to implement, at least from my own personal experience, it came from having like a moment with myself. It wasn't always this reverse meditation. It was having a presence with yourself to like I used to be skinny fat. And so I would look at my mirror and I would have my own form of body dysmorphia. And of course, other people that just tell you, oh no, you look fine, but thank you for invalidating my feelings, other person. But what I would do is, in one case, like to actually start going to the gym, and now it's been a few years, and I've had just incredible body transformation and just change and my own self-belief and self-confidence. And I do think a lot of self-confidence issues comes down to, it's a reflection of how you view yourself, even in physical form. And you have to make sure that you love yourself, because if you don't love yourself, then how can you expect others to love you? And there's a great thing that I really stick to by a mentor who said, and if you can't love yourself, then love the fact that you can't love yourself. Just love that other thing, because you have to start somewhere. And so for me, it's the idea of changing my diet. And like, I remember I would watch like a documentary on Netflix. One was about paleo and how all the benefits of it, which every one of these health documentaries, they always have their own biases. But after watching that one documentary, I'm like, OMG, I have been feeling like I've been eating unhealthy. This is telling me what I should be doing and the benefits and the transformation of these other people. And almost overnight, I decided, you know what, I'm going to start eating more paleo. And I did. And that had a noticeable effect on me. And one time I just looked at myself with my shirt off, and then I felt, I guess I felt myself in like a non-weird sexual way, but I appreciated myself. And as a fact of appreciating everything I've gone through and the person that led me to be right there, is I kind of connected with that inner desire of, why do I want to lose weight? Is because I want to love myself more. I want to show that I can do it. It's not necessarily for others. That I connected with the underlying core reason, the driving force of the thing why I want to have this transformation. And from that moment on, I just had this burst of motivation. And it's just like how Simon Sinek talks about how he has in why, is like, if you have a why, you can endure almost anyhow. I don't know if that was Simon Sinek or if that was Viktor Frankl from Man's Search for Meaning, which is also just a fantastic book that I think everybody should read. It's about how he was a psychologist or psychiatrist, and he was actually inside the Auschwitz camp. And there's so many amazing insights from that, but he ended up creating his own form of therapy called logotherapy. And with that, he demonstrated just how often it's the people who found meaning out of the smallest things that allow them to persevere and survive. And for him, it was seeing that if he could just reduce the suffering of others or give them hope in some way, that is what gave him the motivation to keep going. And so often we don't recognize the mental impact that our thoughts have on our physical reality. And at least from his experience is even if the person was otherwise physically fit, if they didn't have a will to live, then they would likely not survive. And you can find that will to live by finding meaning and purpose. And so if you've been wanting to lose weight and you've tried a whole bunch of different things and they haven't worked for you, it just means you haven't found the deeper emotional reason that is causing you to want to try and lose weight. And once you can connect with that deep inner reason, you will find a burst of motivation that you can really cling on to and get some momentum going. And of course, there's other things like social pressure or like committing, like using like a B commit reminder service, where it's like, if I don't check in, it'll charge me $1,000. And certainly to create an external force to remind yourself to do something can be helpful to push you through the moments that feel tough. But ultimately, if you want to motivate yourself, if you want to change and be a better person, you have to find that will within you. Only you can walk your path. Nobody else can walk before you. And so find that deeper connection, that deeper meaning, because it is the force that will help you live the life that will help you feel the most fulfilled.
I think that was a really key point. And I kind of just want to outline the map and set the next steps for these next 15 minutes here, because what we've already covered is, first of all, the importance of why kids with ADHD or Asperger's should be looking into these questions, right? They're definitely questions that everybody should be looking into, but I think it's even more important if you're coming from a background, a neurodiverse background. And so having covered the self-awareness needed to understand what's wrong, having covered some of the ways that you can go about tackling that, some of the ways that you can tap into that deeper pool of motivation that's going to help you get through the tough times, right? There's that mix of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, like you were talking about. And then there's also these tougher times that happen, especially for entrepreneurs, which are burnout. So how do you personally recognize burnout? How would you recommend kids with ADHD and or Asperger's recognize it and then deal with it to push through to the other side?
So I still suffer from burnout to this day, and quite a bit of often. I mean, I still suffer from it more than I want to, but I understand kind of why I have it. And a part of it is accepting that when I have it, that it's okay to not be productive, because I think we're now in like this culture that really idolizes productivity. And we always have to find something that distracts ourselves from the thing that from our own mind. Like there's a quote by Blaise Pascal that like man's worst fear is to be trapped in a room alone with himself. And that really shows where we are today as a society, of that when was the last time you went to the bathroom without your phone? When was the last time you went to the grocery store and you didn't have your phone with you, or you didn't pull it out unconsciously when you're waiting in line at the grocery store? And a function of that is that we are removing the creativity from our own minds. It's removing the natural desire of our mind to wander and to find things, to look at what's interesting around us, to think about something at a deep level that allows us to connect with our inner emotions and our inner desires so that we can actually be the person that we want to be. And maybe it's not necessarily super evident, but when you wake up and the first thing you do is spend 20 minutes in bed on scrolling through TikTok videos, is you're depriving yourself of whatever your mind was processing from the day before, whatever you're worried about for the day ahead. And that's kind of sad, but it's a reality that we currently face. And so that causes us to feel way more burned out, because the only thing that we're focused on is trying to be something. And then we're burnt out because we're working too hard, because we don't know how to turn it off. We don't know how to relax. And that's certainly a problem that I have, as coming from my own traumatic background of realizing that I had to be productive from a very young age. And I had to make myself be successful because I had no option. There is this famous story of the Spanish conquistador who traveled from Spain over to Latin America, and he burnt the ships as his men set foot on the beach. And he did that because he didn't want them to have any thought in their head that they could turn back and go home. And when you don't have that option to go home, then you will work a lot. You will do everything you need to do to be successful. And that causes you to be burned out. And the thing to be aware of is to recognize that. And that comes back to what I talked about earlier about that level of self-awareness, and also not just self-awareness, but self-acceptance. And that's an issue I still have, is when I'm burnt out, now at least I can recognize when I'm burnt out, and it's different symptoms for everybody. It's be like, for me, it's like I'll open up my email list, which right now my email is at like probably 150 emails, not all of which, but a good 50% of which probably are like super important. And so as a function of that, I realized that, wait, I actually don't really feel like doing email. And then I will actually walk away from the computer and I will do something else. And I try and transition my own mentality to doing something that I feel like doing. And when you can transition, even for a small period of time, to just doing whatever you feel like doing, then you're helping to recondition yourself, because we don't consciously realize it. But all of the things in our task list, whether you use one or not, you're constantly saying that I need to do something. I need to take the groceries out. I need to do the trash. I need to write this blog post. I need to do this essay. And when you say that, you're not necessarily saying this consciously, right? You're not saying this out loud or even in like your own thoughts. It's like an emotion that you'll feel of I need to do something. And when everything is a need to do, it's also a I don't want to do. It's a I am doing this thing for external pressure, for external reason. And that removes any sense of meaning that you could have, that you could derive from that task or that activity. And if you can stop for a sec and recognize, first of all, hey, I'm procrastinating on this. Why am I procrastinating on this? And I like to, a small thing is I like this little necklace. It's a little kind of a necklace that you blow into, and I'll just wear this on my neck. And sometimes when I'm feeling stressed or anxiety or something in me, I'll just naturally kind of cling to this, and I'll just blow through it. And it showed, and actually kind of any kind of breathing exercise, it actually helps to activate your parasympathetic nervous system to slow down your heart rate. Because often that feeling of anxiety, of that I don't want to do this, of I'm burnt out, and what do I do? That often increases our heart rate, and it's partly adrenaline or norepinephrine. And we can actually consciously slow that down. Just like how there's so many studies, actually it's legal in Europe, I believe, that a doctor can prescribe a placebo pill. And we already know scientifically that placebos are incredibly effective at helping us for a whole host of reasons, but they can't do that here in the US. But no matter whether something is a placebo, whether blowing into this pen is actually helping to reduce my anxiety, I think it's helping to reduce my anxiety. I think it's helping me to focus and to recenter. And having it, whether it's a meditation practice that allows you to recognize when you're going out on a thought loop, on an unhelpful rumination cycle, whether you are aware enough to recognize when you're feeling burnt out and to not continue working, to find something else to do to help restore that mental or physical energy, that's incredibly important. And I think we're losing that today. We're losing that in society. And so to have some form of a practice, some form of self-love practice, that could, maybe it could just be a hug, which actually that's a form of therapy too. I forgot the specific name of that therapy, but there's so many ways that we can just be in touch with ourselves. And so I'm going to ramble on, but that's the end of my ramble.
So yeah, there was a lot in there as well. All very important points. I think it was loving kindness meditation, if I'm not mistaken, but there is a lot there, and I know we're running up on time here. So I kind of want to bring everything together in a summary for everybody. Back to just this previous note on burnout, having that morning routine and evening routine, I think will also really help with that. But what would you say, to wrap up, are your top 3 lessons for caregivers of kids with ADHD and or Asperger's, or the young professionals with ADHD or Asperger's to keep in mind moving forward?
Well, Adrian, to be honest, I think I'd like to answer a different question, which is probably in relation to just being an entrepreneur, because I find that, I'm the super successful entrepreneur that's had a lot of success, but simultaneously, I much prefer to talk about the psychological component of stuff, because it's what inherently, intrinsically interests me more. But I will get a lot of questions about how did you become an entrepreneur? And short of talking about my own story, is that I think a lot of those with ADHD are actually can be very good entrepreneurs, but they also tend to lack more so than the average neurotypicals, the self-confidence to become an entrepreneur. But what is ADHD? You tend to lose focus, but you can take pills for that, right? That increase your dopamine level. But there are a handful of gifts, as I'm sure you're aware, that can be granted to those with ADHD. One of those, I think, is kind of this ability to hyper-focus, where, say, it's more difficult to do things that feel meaningless and that you have to do as like chores. But when you find the thing that interests you, you can hyper focus on that thing. And I remember times in my career of being this entrepreneur who didn't have any formal level of education, is everything I learned and everything I've become is a function of the inherent intrinsic interest I found in doing that activity. And I would often learn what I needed to know in order to do the thing that I know I needed to do. And so the example I like to give is when I was building my first hosting company, and I'm like maybe 14, 15, is I'm actually having to look at what are other successful companies doing. And other successful companies were writing kind of press releases. Every company kind of does it, but I didn't know how to write a press release. I didn't even know what a press release was. And yet I didn't take a course on how to write a press release. I didn't go to Skillshare or Udemy on how to write a press release or how to write a blog post. I actually looked at some other press releases and I found, oh wait, there's actually kind of a structure to this. They typically put like what the thing is, what the announcement is, and then the third paragraph is now like a quote from the owner or the founder. And so I was able to write my very first press release, and I thought it was actually pretty good. And I posted it and I got a decent response. And so from that point on, I just continued to do it. And every time I did that, I learned a little bit more about how to write a better press release. And so a lot of the hampers and the blockers that we have in allowing us to become the person that we want to do is partly self-confidence. And it can also be partly of, I don't know this thing, of like a fixed mindset. And really the way that you want to look at everything is from Carol Dweck's book called Mindset, fantastic book that allows you to understand what is a fixed versus a growth mindset. And also I recognize that even myself, I still, as being super aware, and probably even Carol herself can have certain components of the way that she thinks, is some of it's fixed and some of it's growth. You're not just growth in everything. But I realized that in order to become an entrepreneur, I would need to be constantly learning new skills. But that's also the benefit of ADHD, is you love new things. There is way more dopamine when you're trying to do something new. The biggest obstacle that we have is to get over that initial procrastination, that feeling of I'm not good enough. And if you can look past that for a moment and you can get that ball scrolling, eventually you're going to see all the possibilities and you're going to see, oh, that's cool. And so things like I'd learned how to make a website in Dreamweaver, and I never knew how to code. And so I took an HTML course and I built my website while following the course, while learning how to do that. And Photoshop, I can't tell you how many times I've probably taken two to three courses on how to use Photoshop to edit images, etc. And I forget every single time. But the things that I remembered on how to use in regards to Photoshop are things that I needed to do when I had an image in front of me and I needed to edit something within that image. And then you go and Google on YouTube how to do this thing. And that knowledge of applying, of looking for information because you have a why, a specific purpose behind that thing that you're trying to learn, that was instrumental in helping me to become the person I was today. And I didn't let that thought of, oh, I don't know this thing, I don't know how to build a business in a third world foreign country, stop me from doing that thing. There were so many doubts I had, but if I had listened to them, I never would have started. And that's often the thing that we need to do more of, is to be aware of our doubts, to recognize them, perhaps to hug them in kind of a mental connection kind of way, and then to put them aside, to thank them, because they're trying to protect us. But often they overprotect us, like a parent that's kind of like a helicopter parent. And you don't want to helicopter parent your kid. You want to allow them to make some small mistakes, obviously not let them harm themselves too much, but it's only by the mistakes that they end up making, by the courage, by the lack of anxiety that kids typically have, that allows them to learn from those experiences. So if you're never trying because you feel like you can't do something, then how are you ever going to create experiences in which you can learn from? Because it doesn't, I think everybody has different opinions about college and going to school. And I'll never tell a kid that they should drop out of high school because or college, because I've been asked that question a lot of times. But the experience that you gain in college isn't necessarily always applicable to the career or the purpose that you try and associate your life to. But I think having purposes, making mistakes, doing trial and error, there are so many benefits to having ADHD and being an entrepreneur that I would certainly advocate for it even more. But I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, no, definitely a lot there. And I think that exact way of thinking as an entrepreneur can definitely be very advantageous. And I would just add the caveat that it's possible to be that person as the leader and constantly pushing yourself to learn new things because it's what stimulates you the most, and it is what gives you that dopamine. But then the importance would be to surround yourself with the people who can complement the skill sets that you don't have, right? And understanding that, you know, entrepreneurship can be a very long and lonely journey, but it can also be surrounded by a lot of people who become, you know, your comrades through it all. I want to thank you so much. If you still have some time, we can definitely go over some other questions. If not,
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay, cool. So we can go over a couple more. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about from your personal life is how embracing your weirdness can give you superpowers.
I think that comes back to self-confidence and just being somebody who never fit in. Is I just thought I would never have any friends, that I would not fit in, and that I was just a weird person. And we tend to hide our thoughts from others. We tend to try and minimize the amount of things that could cause others to think negatively of us, because we are a social species, and that is a behavior that's trying to protect us. But again, it kind of overprotects us in a way where you aren't your true self, where say you end up going to work and you're working in an environment where you don't feel happy because you have to hide basically your entire portion, or you have to do small talk and you don't like to do small talk, or you don't really like your coworkers, but you have to try and fake liking your coworkers. And so it makes it difficult to live a life that feels inherently meaningful. And what was the question? What was the topic again?
It was just how embracing your weirdness can give you superpowers.
Yeah. And so the more that I've become the person that I am, the more I've trusted that, or more or less, I have more self-confidence in myself. And the more I've let my own weirdness show, or if I ask somebody weird, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I just remember so often I just had this very high self-confidence that I wasn't able to do that I just felt incapable, and that I felt like I couldn't make friends. And when you have low self-confidence, it just impacts you in so many different areas in life. But I'm trying to think of like an example of my own weirdness, but having trouble thinking about that. But the more I just let myself go and stop holding on to what others think of me, is the more that I've become successful, and the more that others that are also genuine and authentic and who they are and accepting of themselves, they'll find each other. And you want to find authentic and genuine friendships, and it's hard to do that when you're hiding parts about yourself, because the more you become the person that makes you weird, everybody has things about themselves that make them weird, but we all tend to hide it. But if you can exemplify that weirdness and do so in a way that is helpful to others, where you're either building yourself up or building others, then I think that has a strong connection with finding your why. Because it's those things that we otherwise think that others will judge us on, is the intrinsic interest that we can derive a sense of meaning from. But yeah, I can't think of any examples about.
That's okay. No, I think you know, that what you said is exactly right, and that's the part that needs to sink in, is just being able to show those parts is what allows you to connect with the others that you want to connect with, and that's what adds to so many positives in every other aspect of life, and can help you rely on each other. So just for everybody listening in, if you do have any questions for Cody, please put those in the chat now as we are wrapping up here. And that way we can get those answered before finishing. Oh, Okay, so we've got one right here. So from Maria, what do you think is best to do for your 16-year-old teenager son with ADHD, low executive function, needs to get out of a bad negative cycle of no motivation?
Hmm. I'm pretty sure I suffer from like the same thing. There's a form of it, I think, in psychiatry, that if you have no motivation, it's also considered to be called, it's a term called anhedonia, if you've heard of it. Anhedonia is really when you can't find a sense of, you can't find happiness in doing anything. Like nothing is inherently interesting to you, and it's a terrible like way of being. But even when I'm anhedonic and kind of in that state where I don't really want to do anything, there are still things that I can focus my attention towards. And I say sometimes all I can feel like doing is like watching a TV series or playing some video games. And if I can't do that, maybe I'll go for a walk. I'll find the things that I'm able to do when I'm feeling a certain way. And if your son is having that, I think you probably may have tried medication, but I think there's an inherent limit to any kind of ADHD medication. It can actually exemplify that feeling of low motivation, because too often we first start taking it and then we feel like we are like it's amazing, but then the tolerance kicks in and then you can't keep going up in dose. It's not great for you. The low motivation, it could be potentially anxiety induced. There's certain medication that you can ask for to try and combine with kind of a stimulant medication, but no motivation could be a function of anxiety. That's something to consider. But otherwise, I would actually just work with him and find out what is it that he wants to do. What is the thing that he finds interest in? There was a online school program that I work with that I gave a talk at, that their whole thing was about helping kids across platforms, disciplines, ages, allow the kids to choose what they wanted to learn. And they would create a teacher that would go along with like a Udemy or a Skillshare class and just kind of provide a sense of direction. But they could have assignments that they can give in, but they were never required to do homework. It's the ultimate form of ensuring that the student is working on the thing that they want to work on, so that it's not being forced upon them. And so if you say he used to be a jiu-jitsu champion or in nature, but now only indoors a video game. And I think so as a parent, I mean, of course you could be like, okay, no video games, you're going to go and do this, but then they're going to resent you. And that's not going to be a great relationship. And no matter how much you can tell a person something, I think deeply inside, he probably wants to be changed. He probably doesn't want to be playing video games inside 6 hours a day. But if you take the video games away, then he's just going to be resentful, and he's going to want to play the video games even more, because we want to do the thing that the authorities tell us that we can't do. And especially if we don't respect those authorities. But the thing that I remember from like an Oprah thing is people just want to feel heard. They don't want you to necessarily solve the problem. They want to feel heard, because that opportunity to feel heard allows you and them to validate their emotions. And I think part of the video games, maybe the video games is him trying to push away this anxiety of maybe he feels like he's not good enough. Have a conversation with him. Just be like super present, be non-judgmental. Like there are great books. Like there was a book called Listen with Intent. And if you read that book, it really walks you through what it means to be having a conversation with somebody where you can, like, it's called listening to learn, listening to fix, listening to win. And an example of that is like listening to fix is if I say that, oh, I lost my job. Then you'd be like, oh, well, why don't you get your resume together? Like you can go and work here, and that's not really what the person wants. So you could be listening to win. Listening to win is, oh, that's no problem. You've got a job. You'll get a job before. I know you got it. But really, we often just want to feel validated, because we already have the mechanisms of change within ourselves. So if he's trapped into playing video games, that's the frame of reference to view it. He's trapped, and you're trying to help him get untrapped. But ultimately recognize you can't push him. He has to get out of that trap by himself, even if he's 16. But I think the more you can just be a supportive parent and loving and non-judgmental, you know, if he wants to play video games, I remember back in there was like this common thing when parents would see their kids smoking a cigarette, and there was like this thing in series where it's like, okay, now you're going to smoke the whole pack of cigarettes, and then you're going to see how it feels. And that's doing absolutely nothing for the child. But instead, ask, why are you smoking that cigarette? Why are you doing this thing? Have you really thought about it? And if they don't feel like talking, then let them like not talk, but just be there for them, because ultimately we all want to be good humans to ourselves and to others. And so it's a coping mechanism. Help them escape that coping mechanism, give them a healthy alternative behavior.
Yeah, that seconded on everything that you've said. I would personally recommend also checking out the masterclass we did with Jeff Copper on motivation, and the one with Dr. Anna Vagan on social gaming, and giving you potentially a healthier perspective on how it could be used as a positive as well. But yeah, most of all, as Cody said, right, it's all about empathizing and speaking and asking questions and just being there. Because even if they're not feeling like speaking now, just knowing that you're there over time and thinking about it, that it might open up later on. Okay, so Cody, back to wrap up here. What would you say are the top 3 lessons that you want all these caregivers, whether they're parents, educators, or health professionals who care for kids with ADHD or Asperger's, to keep in mind, or the young professionals themselves to keep in mind moving forward?
So I think there's one component of the helicopter parenting, and making sure that you're pushing, that you're nudging, but you're not pushing. There's a more recent concept though that I've kind of come to terms with, that I really enjoy. As somebody, I tend to attract a lot of neurotics in my life, and so I've seen symptoms of mental health disorders that have become very aware to me. Like I've had bipolar and borderline personality disorder friends, and so now I can almost instinctively spot the symptoms whenever I see it. And the thing though, I realized that it doesn't matter if you end up in a toxic relationship, it doesn't make that other person toxic necessarily, like, because we are all the heroes of our own story. And whether we know it or not, we are either potentially deceiving ourselves, or we don't fully accept the emotions, or always recognize the patterns and the loops that we end up getting stuck in. And yet I'm able to see that I'm still able to see the good in people, surprising after being screwed over quite a few times in my life. But the framework that I'm getting to is that we all have a inherent set of values, whether we've thought about them or not. We all have a set of values of this kind of core foundation that makes up our beliefs and our thoughts. And those, say, who suffer from, say, borderline personality disorder, where it's typically caused by, say, some PTSD in the past, or abusive parents or other relationships, is that person with borderline, they may do nasty things to others, or they may manipulate others, but they can still, as long as they're not like a sociopath, they can still recognize when they do something that doesn't feel right. But they're not always able to prevent that themselves from doing that, because they'll have the hindsight bias that we tend to look at our actions after the fact and then try and make terms with that. But I see that as, say, somebody with that is their emotions will come up, but their perspective is skewed. Their perspective of reality can be skewed, thinking that, say, somebody did this, and then that means that they're trying to screw me over, or they're doing this thing. They're skewed, and they don't recognize that they're skewed by their previous trauma. And they'll end up doing or saying something that could be problematic, but after the fact, they'll feel a sense of guilt and shame, and they'll go through the cycle of guilt and shame. And if you, from the outside, you can tell them everything that they're doing is wrong, and it doesn't mean that they're going to change or they're going to fix. But what I find is I appreciate this kind of concept that I've seen, where I see everybody has this set of values. And when we become in a guilt shame cycle, it's a function of some kind of previous trauma or personality quirk that causes us to shift away from our values. So whenever you do something that you later regret, that means you deviated from your core values. And there's a part of you that asks, why did you do that? because you want to be a good person and you did something that could be perceived as not being a good person. And it creates this cognitive dissonance between who you want to be and who you think you are. And so I like this framework because it allows you to view everybody with a sense of neutrality, of they are their own person and they all have their own values, and we're all just trying to live up to our own values. And it's those who find that they're shifting away from their values, whether it's by a past trauma or some kind of other mental health disorder. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person and that they don't want to change. And if we try and force the change upon them, then it's just like the whole thing with Republicans, Democrats. It's going to force you to dig deeper into your beliefs. But at the end of the day, as I said, like I don't think Oprah initially said it, but I just really feel the component of you just want to feel heard. And so if you can help just be there for that person and find out or help them uncover for themselves, why are they doing this self-destructive behavior? Why are they stuck in this toxic relationship with either others or themselves? And more than often, it's just being there and listening and not pushing, not providing solutions. That is going to be the driver that helps them to enact change in their own lives. So that's my whole moral, is be there and just listen.
Awesome. Cody, thank you so much for taking part in this interview. You have shared so much value for our audience. Where can people get in touch with you and follow your work?
Sure. I have my website, codymclain.com, CODYMCLAIN.com.
Awesome. And lastly, I know that we've prepared a little gift for some of our listeners today. Can you tell us a little bit about the gift that we've prepared?
Yeah, I believe it's a set of key points and summary items for today's wrap. And we'll probably also make sure that we have any books and other concepts and philosophies that have been mentioned during today's workshop.
Awesome. Thanks again. For all of our listeners, be sure to follow up with Cody McLain. Also, don't forget to download the action guide that we've prepared to help you implement the things that we talked about with Cody today. We spent months vetting these speakers because we knew they'd be really valuable to you. So definitely check them out and follow what they're up to. Cody, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yep. Thank you, Adrian. It was a pleasure.